It's been 5 years since the outbreak of COVID. What has changed for supply chains? Integrating diverse automation and energy innovations come to batteries. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Zebra Robotics Automation. How can you drive down your cost per unit and make every movement count? Read Zebra Robotics Automation's latest ebook, Unlocking Fulfillment Potential, to learn how their Zebra Symmetry fulfillment ecosystem was engineered to boost your profits. You'll discover a unique threefold strategy that enables workers to pick more items in less time, with up to 30% fewer robots compared to legacy systems. Download it now at zebra.com/fulfillment. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, it was 5 years ago this month that our world was rocked with the COVID-19 virus. That's when businesses and schools closed and we were all stuck at home waiting for things to get better. All the while, supply chains kept us fed and happy at home for the most part. And our supply chains had to learn to adjust, and they're still feeling the effects of the pandemic now 5 years later. To reflect a bit on that and how supply chains reacted and how they will now never be the same, we welcome in today's guest. Andrei Quinn-Barabanov is a supply chain industry practice lead and senior director with Moody's. Welcome, Andrei. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Dave.
As we begin, can you share a bit about Moody's and the role you play there?
Yeah, well, I'll start with myself. I always think of myself as the single most important person around. I have 30 years or more than 30 years of experience, most of it in supply chain as a supply chain practitioner. At Moody's, I'm our internal subject matter expert on supply chain risk. We have several solutions for supply chain risk our customers use. We have Moody's has hundreds of customers. We work not just in the supply chain risk space, but in the wider risk management space overall. Moody's has two divisions. It has the ratings division that's very well known, and then it has the analytics group where I reside. And the analytics group is focused on providing solutions for all sorts of risk identification, prioritization, and mitigation. And I'm part of the supply chain team at Moody's Analytics.
Very good. Thank you. As I mentioned in the opening, this month we hit the 5-year mark from the start of the COVID pandemic. What are the major lessons that we learned about our supply chains during that time?
As I was thinking about this question, I was trying to boil it down to three key lessons that I think we have all learned, but definitely have resonated with me. The first one is supply chain risks can definitely get material. Prior to COVID, it was very hard to convince executives, at least in my experience, that supply chain can have material risk. But now it's, I think, undisputed. It is very helpful also in the past 5 years. We have discovered to use techniques, quantitative techniques like value at risk calculation to help companies assess these supply chain risks. So that's the first lesson, the materiality of supply chain risks. The second one is that it definitely, because of that, it definitely pays to be more proactive with risks. In supply chain, we have always been very good at firefighting and dealing with crisis of the day. I've certainly had my share of crisis of the day in my career. But now we actually have some predictive indicators at our disposal, and those can really help us avert some future high stakes crisis. I don't think we'll ever be at the point that we are able to predict and avert all of supply chain issues. Because supply chain is just too complex for that, in my view. But if you use predictive indicators, you will definitely see the reduction in the number of issues you have because you're catching them early, which is crucial. And then the third lesson, so the second is proactive. You need to be proactive with risks. And the third one is that supply chains are intertwined. And we'll be seeing this playing out if there is a real trade war around this globe. So because supply chains are intertwined, there are many under the surface risks and ripple effects. And some risks, we know about, at least in general terms, but I think other risks are going to surprise us, again, particularly if there's a trade war. So those are the three lessons. Material risks, you need to be proactive, and supply chains are intertwined, and there's a lot under the surface.
That's a good analysis. Thank you. Of course, supply chains were put in the spotlight during COVID. In many ways, the actual term supply chain was the first time a lot of people ever heard of that. Were we operating as poorly as many felt during that time, considering that there were shortages of certain goods, or was it just too rapid a shift in demand for supply chains to be able to adjust quickly?
Yeah, demand shifts were huge. No question. They were huge in the very beginning of the pandemic, and then in the middle, I remember all those, was it sweatpants or sweatshirts that were going unsold at some point? Yeah, demand shifts were huge. But there were other important factors behind supply chain failures. So the first one for me was that before COVID, it was very difficult for supply chain people to get attention of the executive management and boards of directors to get them to take supply chain risks seriously enough. They were willing to kind of listen, and then I think in most cases, top executives would just tell supply chain to go solve those issues. You definitely did not see companies' board notes, including supply chain risks, in any kind of significant numbers. And since those risks were not considered very important, there were few, if any, resources allocated to preventing and mitigating supply chain problems. How many of us in pre-COVID supply chain had heard a firm no to our recommendation to invest in development of a second source, for example? We also definitely heard no's to a request to finance inside the company to increase inventory levels. Finance would be like, no, that's a significant additional cost. We're not increasing inventory. So that was a first key reason for failure, right? There was a huge shift in demand, and then of course the supply chain was caught with not enough inventory and just generally unprepared. But because companies also, there's a second factor here, because companies were underinvesting in supply chain risk management, anything that had to do with supply chain risk was really a paper exercise where it existed. So when risks materialized, companies weren't prepared. They hadn't thought enough about supply chain risks. So that's the second lesson. And then the third one is kind of a tricky one, because I think all of us in supply chain, we need to look in the mirror and admit that our attitude about the risks used to be too cavalier or naive. We just did not worry enough about risks. And because we didn't worry enough, we were not prepared enough. So those, I think, are three factors to keep in mind in addition to demand shifts.
Very good. Prior to COVID, we did live in a world with very long supply chains, very complex supply chains. And for the most part, those ran smoothly. We had a lot of just-in-time deliveries on those supply chains, but that's changed a lot. How has it evolved since?
Well, during COVID, when supply chain failures were hitting companies' revenues and profits, and interest rates were low, supply chain got an influx of resources, right? So supply chain became, as kids would say, a thing, right? It became important. So then it did get an influx of resources, including to finance higher levels of inventories. But then as COVID faded into executives' rearview mirror and interest rates rose, finance has pushed supply chain to decrease stocks, and that has elevated operational risk. I would say I was thinking compared to 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I think we have a lot more risk in supply chains as a result of this cutback on risk mitigation that we have seen.
You just mentioned about inventories. Of course, we saw inventories increase dramatically during COVID. Consumers had plenty of stimulus money to spend, and demand was very high. But as we hit that 5-year mark now, we see inventories are adjusted and consumer confidence is now waning, according to recent reports. Can you comment on where we are and where we stand now with inventories, and what would those look like through the rest of the year?
Yeah, so the lower level of inventories definitely results in an increasing risk for businesses. Another major factor, I think, that we see is a threat of trade wars. Companies do not have full maps of their supply chains, so many of them are guaranteed to be ambushed by higher costs. I think a lot of companies don't know what's going to happen if there are, in fact, significant import duties in place. And those import duties are likely to affect commodities and products, manufactured products that are hiding in lower tiers of supply chain. Because it's easy for us to estimate the impact of tariffs on products that we buy ourselves, as a company, right? But it's hard to know how tariffs will impact our lower tier suppliers because we don't understand enough what they buy and more importantly, of course, where they buy from. So that we're gonna see this cost ambush. I would use that expression. So, and the really consequential question is what inflation we'll see as a result of these increased costs. Because the answer will be a major driver of near-term consumer demand. If prices really increase significantly, of course, we'll see a shrinking consumer demand. So as Jay Powell, the Fed chairman, said, there is definitely a lot of uncertainty around the economic look at this time.
And looking also back, we saw during the beginning of the pandemic, e-commerce sales had boomed. That growth has since slowed, but brick and mortar sales still continue to struggle as they've lagged in recovery in the retail sector, with many notable retailers just recently closing stores or shutting down altogether. What happened there with retail, and where is it heading in the future, do you believe?
Wow, I would be a rich man if I could accurately predict the future of retail. But when I look at brick and mortar, I see maybe 6 areas that as a segment likely to be successful. First one is where customers like to touch and feel products. For example, is a grocery store. Another one where they need to pick up a handful of items in a rush. An example would be a convenience store. Also where shoppers need advice. A home improvement store would come to my mind there. The fourth area is where consumers feel excitement of a hunt. Discounters probably would do well as a category. The fifth is where consumers are just simply forced to stop, so gas or charging station. And then the final area of brick and mortar that I think is poised to do pretty well is where consumers get communal experience. And that comes with a question mark because, of course, not every shopping mall offers a communal experience, but maybe multi-use shopping malls and pedestrian areas would be example of the segment offering communal experience to shoppers and therefore doing well in the future. So those are the 6 probably areas that I see.
Very interesting. As we look back and recognize 5 years since the start of the pandemic, are there any other thoughts that you have as to where we are in looking back and reflecting on what we've learned during that time?
I think that while most of us really hope that another pandemic of COVID size is unlikely, what we've definitely learned is that risks becoming a reality very fast is definitely something we need to plan for. So I would encourage all supply chain practitioners like myself to prepare for risks that are likely to be important for your business in your supply chain. You don't need to cover too much ground, but you definitely want to focus on your most important suppliers, on your bottleneck suppliers, and some key risks that they have, whether it's operational risk or financial risk, or any other type of risks that might be affecting your business.
We've been talking today with Andrei Quinn-Barabanov. He's the Supply Chain Industry Practice Lead and Senior Director with Moody's. Thank you, Andrei, for being our guest this week.
Dave, thank you very much.
Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. Most of our DC Velocity editorial staff was at ProMat 2025 this past week, and that's a huge supply chain show and the largest material handling exhibition in North America. And Ben, almost everywhere we looked, there were robotics and automation to be seen. What caught your eye at ProMat this year?
That's right. Robotics and automation is always a major theme at that ProMat show, and that was definitely continuing this year. We saw solutions for automation in material handling and fulfillment and picking and inventory, many more. But we also saw a parallel theme that's part of that at the show, and that addressed the question of how to manage all those different various products when you're packing a wide variety of different automation platforms like robots or handheld computers or even high-tech conveyors and forklifts into a single warehouse building. They all need to work perfectly in concert, or else you just get traffic jams where the different systems come together. And as you might imagine, different providers all have their own strategies on the best way to achieve that goal of making them work in concert. That's often called orchestration. And so we got to see a number of those this year.
Well, it is a very complex problem. What are some examples of what you saw to actually achieve that orchestration?
Yeah, I'll touch on a few things that we saw. And we visited, of course, dozens of booths and talked to dozens more vendors in our 3 days at the show. But some of the things that stuck out include a company called Dexery, and they provide what are basically autonomous mobile robots that are fitted with a tall mast, all loaded with sensors. When I say tall, it could be 30, 40 feet in the air. So those sensors can see into multiple story racks. And Dexery's computers, they drive themselves up and down the aisle to count inventory in the building far faster than manual employees could do it in the past if they were walking those aisles with clipboards. So the company says that they get much better data, and that enables basically all the different systems in the building to work better together because they're, operating, sort of reading from the same song sheet, as it were. We also visited robotics providers that make the actual hardware, like Movu and AutoStore and Ocado, who provide different ways to store inventory much more densely inside the warehouse than you could do it manually in the traditional ways, and likewise to provide accurate data on exactly where that inventory is. And of course, all those 3 providers say that lets their machines work more closely with different machines. A final way that we saw this attempt to happen was with companies that provide software to make all these platforms fit together. One of those, for example, was Robotion, and Robotion makes software that lets different robots share data and literally hand off totes from one to another. And likewise, Gray Orange, which is better known to date as a robot maker, but they've lately been more concentrating on their gray matter software, which, you guessed it, provides integration for a rising number of different hardware and software vendors in the building. So there's a lot of work still to do to allow all these units to collaborate, but definitely we noticed that there are some really clever engineers working hard on this problem.
Yes, there are, and I think that we need to also ensure that there is a way and a path towards simple integration to very complex automation. We'll continue to see that as a theme going forward.
Yes, there is. It's something that sounds a little bit geeky to describe, but it's definitely a really important problem to iron out.
Right. Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, you spent some time looking at energy sources at ProMat, particularly some advancements in batteries and charging systems. What did you discover?
Yeah, that's right. So as you and Ben just talked about, this year's ProMat show certainly didn't disappoint. It was a hub of technology innovation, as you said, and the industry has really come to expect that, I think, over the past few years. And as you say, batteries and charging solutions are a big part of that, and a couple of things stood out to me during some meetings that I had. One solution, I should say, was from EnerSys, which is the big publicly traded energy storage solutions company in this industry, and the other was from forklift power and energy company Concentric.
Where there, of course, were a lot of battery and charging solutions on display. What was interesting about the two that you just mentioned?
Well, EnerSys introduced a battery energy storage system, or BESS. This is a type of energy storage system that uses batteries to store and distribute energy in the form of electricity. Facilities can then draw on the stored energy to power different applications as needed. I met with EnerSys representatives during the show, and they explained the product to me. It's called the Nexus BESS or BESS. I've heard it said both ways, not exactly sure the right way to say that, but an example I think helps of how this works. So warehouse operations can use the system to better manage energy costs via peak shaving from the traditional electric grid. And that means you draw from the grid and store energy during periods with lower utility rates for use during periods with higher rates. The Nexus system is a concept, so it's not available just yet. But again, it's designed to help facilities manage energy usage and get better control of those energy costs, which is a huge issue today, as we know. The other example, Concentric, was showing off its Power Hive product. And this is an automated forklift power management system for lithium-ion batteries. In a nutshell, this system combines a large robotic arm. It's a huge arm like you'd see in a manufacturing plant. It's not like a little picking arm or anything like that. A weight-sensitive mat, and a battery charging station. So when a forklift battery needs charging, the forklift driver parks the forklift on the mat, and that activates the robotic arm. The arm then removes the battery from the forklift and puts it into the charger, swapping it out for an optimally charged battery. The whole process takes about 2 minutes. And the main benefit, there are many, but the main is reduced downtime. Although, they're faster to charge and less maintenance required than lead acid, they can still take a long time to charge. And facilities often address that with opportunity charging, but that can take a toll on battery health over time. So what this system does is keep the batteries optimally charged and in good shape, and it keeps all your forklifts up and running. The company says this can also save space as well because you don't need a bank of chargers, and it can be contained in a really pretty compact area of the warehouse. I should also note this product was named a finalist for Best Innovation in the 2025 MHI Innovation Awards. MHI, of course, is the Material Handling Institute, which is the group that produces the ProMat show every 2 years.
Those do sound like some interesting innovations designed to keep that mobile equipment productive and moving along. Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories and to look at all of our coverage from ProMat of last week. Also check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Andrei Quinn-Barabanov of Moody's for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Zebra Robotics Automation. Are you tired of overpriced, underutilized autonomous mobile robot fulfillment solutions that drain your profits? It's time to switch to Zebra Robotics Automation. Their cutting-edge Zebra Symmetry fulfillment solution is engineered to reduce your cost per unit and give you that unbeatable competitive edge. Don't settle for less. Maximize your profits with Zebra. Discover the future of fulfillment at zebra.com/fulfillment. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.